Transformers Resurrection, Number 1. Loss of life is only a tragedy if it is without... No, I'm sorry. I can't read that, not today. Today, on his adopted world of Earth, we bury Optimus Prime. Not his body, that's gone. Not his spark, that belongs to Solus. We bury the idea of Optimus Prime. He was a warrior, a hero, a killer, a liar. Destruction was his companion. Did he cause it, or prevent worse? The thing that made Optimus who he was that he asked those questions. Life is not simple, and neither is death. We inter the idea of Optimus into the soil of his adopted world, a world that has, in turn, adopted us all, till all are one. Windblade delivered her eulogy at the funeral of Optimus Prime, the hero who had destroyed Unicron and brought a new age of peace to the galaxy. Bumblebee had always known that one day he would be standing at Prime's funeral. He had imagined it was going to be a grand ceremony on Cybertron, or maybe on Earth, where he would be recognized as the hero he was. Nominus received a great funeral, as did Sentinel. Even though Zeta was a traitor and scum, Optimus saw to it that he was remembered as he was, the mentor and friend who had reached out to Optimus while he was still the cop known as Orion Pax. But this was a character assassination of a dead man. Windblade had been involved in scandal after scandal since she first arrived on Cybertron back in the day, but her recent popularity and position as the leader of Cybertron and the Council of Worlds had gotten to her head to such a degree that she apparently felt it appropriate for her, of all people, to grandstand at Prime's funeral. Bumblebee clenched his fist quietly as Windblade spoke, his optics downcast and focused on Prime's faceplate on his ceremonial coffin that contained no body. At least Windblade was right about one thing. Optimus had been lost in the black hole that was once Unicron, now hovering in the skies above Earth. A killer, a liar. Destruction was his companion. Windblade's words echoed in Bumblebee's head. New Cybertron. A killer? A liar? Rodimus was outraged as he paced back and forth inside Minimus Ambus's office in New Cybertron. Minimus sat calmly in his chair, remaining motionless, besides his optics who followed Rodimus in his pacing. In the corner of the room was a screen displaying recorded footage of the funeral for Optimus Prime. "Yes, I heard," Minimus replied. "I might not have agreed with everything Optimus did, but the fact remains that he was a hero, a genuine hero. They don't make them like that anymore. Yes, when I lost everything, when I lost Nyan, he was there to talk to me. He had just gotten the Matrix back then, and he spoke to me, and I had never felt so comforted. And the Surge, it looked like we were going to see the last of him for good, but he stood back up and talked to all of us on Cybertron, and it was like Primus himself had come back," Rodimus continued. Minimus was silent, as it was obvious that Rodimus wanted to continue his rant, and that his current pause wasn't an invitation for Minimus to speak. "He was our leader. He was our hero. More so than anyone else who ever followed in his footsteps. Hell, if he were here today, he'd be able to unite us again, truly unite us, not this weird mishmash between Empire and Confederacy Windblade has us in. And look at Trax, look at Bumblebee." Rodimus pointed to the screen at the yellow bot standing by the coffin. Windblade drags Prime's name through the mud, and Bumblebee just stands there and lets her do it. Nobody knew Prime better than Bumblebee. "And why are you bringing this up to me?" Minimus asked. Rodimus smiled at his former crewmate. "Windblade isn't our leader, not really. That's just not how Cybertronians work. We need a Prime. Even when Bumblebee or Starscream or Windblade was in charge, everyone looked to Optimus. Now that he's gone, we need a new Prime." Minimus frowned at Rodimus's idea. "For there to be a new Prime, we'd need the Matrix, and you know as well as I do that we don't have any spare matrices lying around. The original was destroyed. The 12 duplicates were emptied. The Matrix is gone, and so are the Primes who have led us since the beginning." "You remember the siege of the Citadel?" Rodimus asked. Minimus raised an eyebrow. "While Ultra Magnus was present during the siege, that was the original Ultra Magnus and not Minimus, a detail Rodimus had forgotten. Orion Pax went in, and Optimus Prime came out. Yes, the real Matrix was underneath the Citadel, and Zeta Prime blasted him down into the underground base. It was like fate," Minimus said, recalling the knowledge not from first-hand experience, but from secondary and tertiary sources. "We're here on Cybertron, right? New Cybertron, a displaced Cybertron from another reality." "Yes," Minimus frowned. "But Functionist Cybertron's Matrix was a fake, and 6 of 12 built it into his face. That was the fake Matrix, the Nominus Matrix. Do you remember your history? Before Nova Prime left, dissenters hid the original Matrix." Minimus suddenly put everything together. His optics widened as he looked up from his thoughts to Rodimus. Rodimus had his signature smile across his face. "I'm putting together a team." Metroplex. Just like Metro Titan before, Metroplex now served as a floating base for Cybertronian command on Earth. The floating city now hovered over the war-torn Washington, D.C. that was being repaired from Unicron's attack. Tentatively, the President of the United States had been operating on Metroplex for the time being. Right now, the President was watching various screens of various different news sources at the same time. A Cybertronian refugee camp that was built on the outskirts of Chicago had fallen under attack by a group of humans with laser weapons. In Northern California, a disease carried by Elonian animals had spread to humans with terrible side effects. In Florida, a Decepticon celebration of Megatron fell under attack by disgruntled Autobots, and their argument destroyed an entire town, killing 4,000 people. The President held her head in her hands as Windblade walked into the room. "Is everything all right, Madam President?" Windblade asked. As the President turned to face the leader of the Council of Worlds, Windblade caught a glimpse at footage of pro-independence Americans storming the governor's mansion of Georgia after the governor had passed legislation that categorized speech against the Council of Worlds' domination of Earth as, quote, hate speech, a bill that was aligned with the President's agenda. "I am realizing that forcing aliens to live with each other doesn't actually make for a better world," the President sighed. Windblade frowned. "I understand that Earth is a bastion of resistance to the Council." Windblade put her hand to her chin in thought. "But this is a different level. Perhaps I could dispatch some forces to keep the peace. Do you think that will work? Do you honestly think that will work?" the President asked, turning to look at Windblade. Windblade wasn't sure how to respond. It didn't occur to her whether or not that plan would work. She merely identified a problem and went to the natural conclusion of how to stop it. "Or do you think that might just make things worse?" the President continued. "What are you saying, Madam President?" Windblade asked. "Are you saying we should leave?" "I'm saying your pink murder bot made a speech in Berlin where she said, and I quote, 'This world is ours.' You think that's the best PR?" "We have nowhere else to go. Unicron destroyed Cybertron," Windblade protested. "That's not what I heard. I heard you got a new Cybertron that has an underpopulation crisis, the president pointed out. Windblade was silent in response. The president had been her political ally these past few months since the Cybertronian colonists and Elonians had fled to Earth. Was the president really starting to change her tune? Madam President, I have a new report from Flint. Says Cobra units have popped up all over the world, the president interrupted. Then they must be preparing for an attack, Windblade mused. That's just it. Flint says he doesn't think the Joe team is discovering more Cobra cells because they're amping up their profile in preparation for an attack. He says he thinks his team is finding more Cobra cells because there's simply more of them than there used to be. Do you know how Cobra recruits people? The president asked. They attract psychos, Windblade pointed out. They also attract the disaffected and dispossessed, the president replied. Things are going to get worse, and I'm starting to rethink my original agenda. Windblade knew what direction the president would eventually go down, even if the president wasn't going to go down that route right now. Windblade brought her gaze back up to the screens in thought. Was she going to be the one to oversee the end of the Council of Worlds? Was that going to be her legacy? New Cybertron. I know I'm supposed to be the ambassador to the Galactic Council, but you expect me to negotiate the admission of Cybertron into it? Bumblebee said exasperatedly. He was in Prowl's office on New Cybertron. Yes, the wars are over. Once Megatron is executed, there is no reason for the hostilities with the Galactic Council, Prowl tried to reason. You know as well as I do that that's a bunch of beryllium baloney. The Galactic Council is a bureaucratic black hole. They would strip us of any autonomy through heaps of paperwork, Bumblebee protested. I don't have the energy to argue this, Bumblebee, Prowl frowned. You don't have the energy to argue this because you know it's a stupid idea Windblade wants us to do, and not what you want to do, Bumblebee pushed on. It's not what Prime would want either. Prowl looked at Bumblebee from beyond his desk. The two Autobots looked each other in the eyes before Prowl brought his optics downward. He knew Bumblebee was right, but he wasn't the schemer and the backstabber he used to be. Not anymore. Right? There is a severe lack of hierarchy and leadership structure on New Cybertron, Perceptor complained, barging through the doors of Prowl's office without bothering to knock. This caused Bumblebee to almost jump at the sight of the sniper scientist. Even the Lost Light had a clear-cut hierarchy, even if we didn't follow it all the time. I don't know if you've noticed or not, Perceptor, but there's been a severe lack of hierarchy all around, Bumblebee pointed out. Perceptor looked over at Bumblebee, taking a moment to recognize the bot in his newer body. Ah, yes. Hello, Bumblebee. Perceptor greeted the former Autobot leader. Hello to you too, Bumblebee said, raising an eyebrow. Perceptor had suddenly gone quiet. Hey, Perceptor. Everything okay? Perceptor remained silent until Prowl spoke up. You know, you aren't the most popular Autobot lately. What? At Prime's funeral. You just stood there and let Windblade say what she said. Everyone knows you are Prime's friend, and you let her defame him. I'm not a fanatic for Optimus Prime, believe you me, but even I could tell that he was a true hero, more so than any one of us. Bumblebee's optics widened. He had no idea that so many Autobots thought this way. He had believed Windblade's opinion was the majority. I mean, we both served under him from the very beginning. We know what kind of bot he was. And destruction was not his companion. It was his never-relenting foe, Perceptor spoke up bitterly. Bumblebee looked over at the scientist and then back over to Prowl. Then we're in agreement. We need to get Optimus Prime back, Bumblebee said. But how? Perceptor smiled. I've already asked myself that question, and I've already formulated a working plan. Little Cybertron. Little Cybertron, the largest Cybertronian refugee center on Earth, was bustling as usual. Rather, overpopulation had become a problem as unhappiness rose with overcrowding. But that didn't matter to the Cybertronian refugees when they all became distracted by an incoming object from the sky, burning through the atmosphere. They had just managed to get out of the way when a red, white, and blue futuristic jet crashed into Little Cybertron, with dirt and debris being thrown every which way. Once the crash had ended, the Cybertronians began to chatter and whisper as they approached the downed jet that suddenly transformed into its heavily wounded robot mode. Get me, RC, Jetfire coughed, to no one in particular. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her they're coming. To be continued.